2023 meeting of the Anacortes Planning Commission. In taking roll, we have all the planning members present except for Mr. Molyneux, who is out today. I want to recognize the two recent departures, Mr. Jack Curtis and Ms. Sarah Ruther. They both did outstanding work while they were here. Ms. Ruther's position has been filled. Mr. Curtis's position is in process of interviews, if I understand correctly. Has everybody reviewed the minutes from January 11th? Any questions or comments? None being heard, those are approved. Mr. Miesmer, it's time for correspondence.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to welcome Mr. Stoneman as our newest member of the Planning Commission for this evening. So welcome to your first Planning Commission meeting. There will be many more to come this year, I'm sure. And again, Mr. Chair, thank you again for recognizing Sarah Reuter and Jack Curtis. We appreciate their community service over the past few years. So.
Go ahead, proceed with your agenda.
We can do that. Have you got our loaded up here? Okay, so this evening, the Planning, Community, and Economic Development Department is going to give an update on what's been happening and what you might be seeing in the future for projects coming your way. So, a little overview here, PCED, who we are and what we do, department news and projects, building updates, planning updates, and community development block grant updates. Organization chart shows you the various folks that work in the department. I would say a great team of folks that we have working here. What we do: prepare, administer, and implement land use plans, policies. I'm going to move this out of the way. And codes that guide and regulate the physical development of the city. So building permit reviews, issuance, inspections, code compliance, investigation and enforcement, land use permit review, processing and tracking, long-range planning and various legislative actions, frontline customer service at the permitting counter. And I can tell you over the past couple of years since COVID has waned that it is getting much busier at the counter. Though folks still like doing their digital submittals, a lot of folks still like coming in and chatting about projects. So we hear from the residents, builders, developers, businesses, city departments, and other agencies. Economic development activities, coordinate with the chamber, the port, to promote business retention, growth, and attraction, and tourism promotion. We also spend a lot of time working with EDASC, Economic Development Association of Skagit County. Staff support for various committees, council committees, planning commission, city council, and administer the community development block grant as part of our work. Building division updates. I'll let Mr. Rob Freisinger take care of that. If you haven't met Rob Freisinger is our building official for the city of Anacortes.
Alrighty, our team's been busy helping.
We want to make sure that both of the people watching online can hear us.
That's right. That's a key thing, because not everybody wants to be in person, and some people want to be online, and we got to have that available. Anyways, our team's been busy helping things go up, as well as improving how we help things go up. We've been focusing on implementing the new permitting software we're working on. We've been monitoring construction stormwater compliance, maintaining the city character through code enforcement, and doing our part to help new houses go up and new businesses open. Our new permitting software is something called SmartGov. It has a public portal, which allows people to apply for permits and submit plans, as well as track permit review status, and pay for permits and schedule inspections online, as well as viewing project documents and notices. It allows us to all work off of one set of plans instead of having our own copy that we mark up and then transfer over. So it facilitates things moving smoothly. We're almost there with it. It's been taking a while. We're some short number of weeks from going live with it. We're initially going to have a soft rollout where we invite people to apply using it, so we can work out the kinks with some sort of more trusted contractors before we go wide with it. We've had a lot of new businesses lately. I couldn't honestly come up with a list that did justice to it, but the ones that stuck in my mind were Tasha Lee's Table, which is a restaurant that's in process of being built, Sugar Mama Cafe, a restaurant that's going to be a couple blocks over. The former Lover's location has been bought by an outfit called Stabbert Maritime. The former Lover's location's been bought by an outfit called Stabbert Maritime, which focuses on fancy ships. Honestly, you look on their website, they've got all sorts of undersea submersibles and just really interesting things. It'll be a nice change up in that little corner of town there. There's a Good Bagels Cafe, can't beat bagels, a new birth and wellness cooperative, and so far this year, 97 more businesses that aren't on my list. So yeah, a lot of businesses going in. Our code enforcement officer has been, or our code enforcement inspector rather, has been quite busy. The chart here is various complaints. Blues are the complaints, and the reds are the still open cases. So there's not a lot of red on that. Our guy's working pretty hard on that. I'm used to speaking in a small environment where there's no microphone, and it's just broadcast by voice. So you'll have to bear with me as I learn the tricks of this space. Our update on our larger building projects. There's Elevation 31 townhomes at 21st and Q. That is almost done. Skagit co-housing is also almost done. Landed Gentry has a number of locations of townhomes. The one at 32nd and R, almost done. The Anacortes Family Center office building is also almost done. Most of those are just sort of waiting on a final inspection. The Landed Gentry townhomes, 904 32nd, that's at about 80% complete. The Strandberg Crosswinds Cottage, that says 66%, but it's really more like 60. Late breaking news there. Landed Gentry townhomes, another one on 32nd, 10 units going in, that's about 50% done. The Family Center apartments are at about 70% complete right now. Irwin Parkside duplexes, about 25%. The Islands Inn hotel to apartments conversion is currently at about 15% done. But given that they already have the building, I expect that to go fairly quickly. The Savvy Bank new building is about 10%. And the Samish low-income cottage cluster is going in. That's right about 5%. They're sort of just getting off the ground. We've had some... Oh, just a second. How do I go back to this one? There we go. Welcome. Right, we've had, I guess, trends in housing types. I like to pay attention to numbers and graphs and things like that. I like to try to see where things are going. So this is my my effort to explain how our trends in housing types have changing. A lot of what the building department does is just getting new houses up. And new houses over the past few years have shifted from a very homogeneous single-family residence type structure to a much wider variety of options. If you turn back the clock way back to 2019, we pretty much had single-family houses and then cottages, or, not cottages, but ADUs, which are basically, a little single-family house in the backyard of the big single-family house. And then we had duplexes, which are almost single-family. So if you go back to 2019, what we're seeing is entirely single-family homes of one type or another. Go forward a little bit, we had some multifamily units that came in 2020. There was a change in the zoning code in 2019. One of the things was a bonus height, which allowed one of the two projects in the multifamily to go in because they had one extra floor to build, and that penciled out their, financial numbers on making their project profitable. In 2021, you see there's a lot more pieces of that pie going on there. We now have townhome units are starting to be popular by then. A number of builders just decided that was a great way to, you get much more density. They can take out one old house and then put in 10 units. And that works a whole lot better for them. By 2022, in essence, the pie is evening out as people are getting used to different ways of building things. They're sort of finding their feet under them with the changes of the code that we had 3 years prior in that. In 2022, we also had a 38-unit hotel to apartment conversion go in. So initially, I didn't have that on my graph, but if I throw that into the graph, with when it started, it actually, it shows the variety and the extent that they're actually filling out those varieties. It's not tiny pie wedges. They're substantial portions or a greater variety of housing types. And so far this year, it's early. We don't have any multifamily units yet coming in, but I would expect that to change as the year goes on. If you look back the last few years, we've had roughly a 22% of our units be multifamily, and I would expect that to continue in the future. Our total housing stock in the city, 17% of it is multi-unit, and that's if you include senior housing and assisted living facilities. If you take those out of it and just have sort of general purpose facilities, there's only 11% multifamily. So I expect that as time goes on, that'll increase. And our overall building permits issued, we typically issue somewhere between 800 and 1,000 permits per year. That's not housing units, that's, some of those are houses, some of those are apartment buildings, some of those are replacement water heaters and the like. But if you look back over the years, you can see we've had a little over 100, 120 kind of typical permits by this time every year. 2021, things went gangbusters. We had 174 by this time this year. Last year, it dropped to 157, and this year, we're only at 130. So we're still above our average, but we are down from the last 2 years. One of the things I wanted to point out is that things are slowing in part because the interest rates have gone up, and that was very apparent at our permitting counter that there were a lot of projects coming in, and then as rates started climbing, initially people were pushing things in so that they could get their rates locked, and then it reached a point where, in essence, things slowed down a lot as people decided not to do projects. But people still need houses. There's still not a lot of places available for rent or to purchase. And things like water heaters break, so we expect to still have that kind of activity going forward. I also think that density-intensive projects are likely to be pushed by this economic situation, because if you can squeeze more houses on a lot, you're going to have a higher profit to square footage ratio, and if you're having to deal with a higher borrowing cost, that's going to help that out. And current planning updates.
Hello, Commissioners, members of the public. Let's talk land use. Starting with a quick update on past projects. Since the Planning Commissioners, since they held their open public hearings on these projects and recommendations were made, all of these projects have since been approved by City Council. We have been told to expect construction to begin at the Ports RV Park, including the new parking lot adjacent to Docks JKL this summer. The Fiddlehead School expansion project is complete, and they have children attending school in their new building. The Samish Early Learning Center has been kind of stalled a little bit as they focus on breaking ground on their Samish cottage development project on D and 34th. The Anacortes Readiness Center has construction permits and they have begun work. The City of Anacortes wastewater treatment plant outfall at U Avenue is currently working through the state and federal permitting process. And the cottage crossing, or Crossings Cottages, they've gone through their final plat approval. So their plat has been recorded. They have a total of 10 out of the 18 cottages permitted, and there's various stages of construction still happening. Some units are completely finished, and others are just getting started. Here's a couple pictures of that particular project. I found it quite interesting. Now, upcoming land use projects. Here are some exciting land use projects on the horizon. None of these projects have yet come to a complete application status, but we know that they are fast approaching. So let's take a quick glimpse into what we know about each of these projects. Since MJB held their pre-application neighborhood meeting, everyone is eager to know what the plans for this site is. Let me repeat what I said earlier. We do not have a complete application for this project yet, but we can tell you that what we know from their pre-application neighborhood meeting, that their current phase is focusing on a land division proposal. This upcoming process will not include any proposed buildings, businesses, or uses. They're only requesting plat approval, and it may look something like what you see here on your screen. Additionally, they will be doing some shoreline work and a request to the city to vacate a portion of the city right-of-way near the roundabout. So both these pictures show proposed conditions, but we do have currently a city right-of-way here, if you can see my arrow, where there's a small parking lot and public restrooms. So this may be what this project will look like, lot-wise. Again, not development-wise. It may or may not be common knowledge, but Skagit County will be in the possession of an electric ferry to replace the current diesel-run Guimas ferry. This will require that both Anacortes and Guimas side docks need to be upgraded, but on the Anacortes side is where the charging station for the new electric ferry will be. So what we see here is an illustration of the apron, new apron. So the boat would pull in from the right side of your screen to the left. They have a new catwalk over to a new platform where a swinging arm, that is the charging station, will be located. They do have some upgrades needed to the dolphins, existing dolphins, as the electric ferry is not the same exact size as the current diesel ferry, but largely not a huge amount of change happening. Another look at what this electric ferry project will come to. So here we see the new platform that will hold the electric charging arm. Example of both what that would look like during low tide and high tide. The port has a stormwater and street improvements project on 2nd Street, where Curtis Wharf is located. The city granted the port a right-of-way use agreement for 2nd Street, and so they are proposing to improve that section of road as it is littered with potholes, with their heavy trucks and other equipment coming back and forth on that site. And in order to improve the street, they have to improve stormwater. So we get some improvement there, as well as some shoreline planting. And then lastly, this one's brand new. This is another port project. It's been submitted just for a pre-application meeting, so we haven't even had the chance to review this project, but I want to let this site stay on the screen for a while so people can see what we're looking at. I'll draw out, or I'll point out some areas for reference. So this area, if you can see my mouse, where it says Development Area D, that's the current dog park. So for reference, that's the current dog park. They are proposing to do some road realignments. They're going to propose to do some parking lot realignments and some new development areas. They show on here a future park. And then over in the corner here is where the access for the RV park and new parking lot that I mentioned at the beginning of my part of the presentation. This is definitely a multi-phased project. So here we have called out phase 1, which again is the RV park and Dock JKL parking. Then they have some 9th Street and R Avenue realignments proposed as part of phase 2, with the public park proposed as phase 2.1. We have some buildings as phase 3, along with this portion of the parking lot in the center of the screen. Phase 4 is additional parking lot to the left of the screen, and future development closer to Q Avenue. And then lastly, they say that they will be working on a seawall and esplanade along the shoreline. So this one is just at the pre-application meeting phase. We haven't held the pre-app yet, so city staff has not yet reviewed what the port's proposing, but we're excited about it. And it will definitely be coming before the Planning Commission. We're in shoreline, and this is a lot of changes. Thank you.
Thanks, Grace, and hi, everyone. My name is Libby Grage. I'm the planning manager for the Planning, Community, and Economic Development Department. And I'm going to talk about this slide. So this slide is showing the land use permit trends over about 12 years. Grace talked about a lot of projects that were type 3, type 4 quasi-judicial projects that came through the public hearing process and Planning Commission saw and then went on to City Council. But the Planning Department reviews a lot of other types of permits, including ones that are administrative decisions, like boundary line adjustments. There are critical areas permits and exemptions, home occupations, SEPA environmental review, shoreline exemptions. So there's a lot of other types of permits that come through the door. And similar to the building permit graph that you saw earlier, we see a little bit of a decline over the last year or so, but overall, the trend is up over historic levels in terms of land use permits being submitted to the city. So this timeline is showing about 10 years worth of legislative activity, planning-related legislative activity. And these are all processes that the Planning Commission has participated in through holding public hearings and deliberation, and then ultimately making recommendations to the City Council on these pieces of legislation. And I'll just talk a little bit about each one. Going back to 2016, that was a major update of our comprehensive plan. I think there's one or two of you that were around for that process. So that was a major rewrite of our comprehensive plan. And that led to some changes in 2019 to our development regulations. We established a unified development code, updated our land use review procedures, and then basically rewrote the entire development regulations as well in order to implement that 2016 comprehensive plan. Also during that time frame, there was a moratorium put on acceptance of permit applications for projects using a bonus height incentive in the R4 zone west of Commercial Avenue. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. In 2021, we completed a complete update of the critical areas regulations. In 2022, there were some appeals of that critical areas regulation, or some challenges to that ordinance that went to the Growth Management Hearings Board, and that resulted in some further amendments to the regulations in 2022. The floodplain management regulations were updated that year, as well as, that was last year, wow, as well as daycare in the R4 zone, making that a permitted use, along with some conditions. The riparian management zones were getting more recent, so you might remember that work that the Planning Commission did on those regulations. And then also in 2022, saw the adoption by resolution of the Housing Action Plan by City Council, and Planning Commission also had a presentation from makers on that document. So now here we are in 2023, and there are a few pieces of pending legislation that have gone through the Planning Commission process and are at City Council right now that I'll talk about here in a second. And then moving forward, you can kind of see what is on the horizon for legislative activity. So this is a chart showing 2023 through 2025 legislative work plan. So as I mentioned, the R4 bonus height issue has worked its way through Planning Commission and is now at City Council. The Planning Commission recommended that the City Council allow that moratorium to expire, and currently the City Council is considering that recommendation along with some potential changes to the bonus height incentives, including increasing the number of units that would need to meet the small unit criteria for a project to be considered for the bonus height, and then also some changes to the minimum open space requirements. And so I think that council discussed that at Monday night's council meeting, so that'll be coming back next week or the week after. So the next item I wanted to talk about was the Shoreline Master Program periodic update. A few planning commissioners may recall that the Planning Commission in April of 2022 recommended approval of the update to the City Council. Since then, there have been as I mentioned, quite a few changes and amendments to the critical areas regulations. And so that's resulted in some challenges in integrating those regulations into the Shoreline Master Program. So currently staff is working with the Department of Ecology on resolving those issues, and then we plan on bringing that document back to City Council, hopefully here in the next couple months, and we'll be able to complete that process. Another item that will be coming back to you soon is the 2021 Comprehensive Plan and Development Regulation Amendments docket that has been on the back burner for just a little while, but we want to bring that back, and we'll bring the Planning Commission back up to speed on what was discussed previously, and we'll also hold a public hearing. Anticipating that coming back in the spring of 2023. Over the next couple years, we'll also be working on housing action plan implementation. So we'll be looking at near-term actions that the city can take that can help implement the housing action plan, and those would be development regulation amendments that'll also come through the legislative process, come to Planning Commission and then City Council. Parklets, there is a need to develop permanent regulations for regulations for permanent placement of parklets within the public right-of-way, and so that's a process that is being worked on right now. Short-term rentals is a topic that has long been on the agenda to get to. There need to be regulations identified for short-term rentals, if they should exist, where they should exist, and if so, under what conditions. And so that is a public conversation that we'll be having here in the next few months. Tree preservation is also an item that has been identified as something that the community would like for us to take a look at, and our current regulations and whether they are in line with the community's vision for trees in our city. And finally, we'll be working on the 2025 periodic update of the comprehensive plan. So we're back after 9 years to do the process all over again. And as part of that periodic update, which is mandated by the Growth Management Act, we get to look at that document every, I think it's 10 years now. So what we will be looking at during that process are amendments that have happened to the Growth Management Act during the intervening 9 years. So we'll make sure that anything that's changed in that body of legislation our comprehensive plan and development regulations are consistent with. We'll also be looking at the urban growth area and population projections. So we'll be getting some new growth initial growth allocations that the county and cities will work cooperatively to allocate population to urban growth areas and rural areas in the county. And we'll be using that information to look at whether the city's urban growth area has enough buildable land to accommodate that projected growth. We'll also be looking at the land use, housing, capital facilities plan, utilities, transportation, and economic development elements to make sure that those are all up to date with the current Growth Management Act legislation. Also want to make sure that they're internally consistent and consistent with countywide planning policies. Development regulations and critical areas regulations and resource lands regulations will also be looked at to determine whether they need to be updated. So that'll be a several year long process. So. Finally, I just wanted to talk about a couple of kind of cool projects that are going on right now. The city received 2 grants from the Department of Ecology to work on a user guide and a shoreline permit monitoring project. So the city's hired a consultant with that money to help develop these two projects. The first one is a user guide, and that will consist of some guidance brochures that will sort of put the shoreline development regulations into layman term, plain talk, to make it easier to understand for folks that live on the shoreline or need to do some development on the shoreline, what's allowed and what's the permitting process for that. And then the shoreline permit monitoring project will take a look at about 10 years of shoreline permits that have been issued by the city. And they'll take a look to identify any implementation gaps and develop an improved system for permit tracking and including mitigation and monitoring, so we can make sure that when we issue a shoreline permit, that it's consistent with the shoreline regulations, and that we're following up and making sure that any mitigation is installed and then monitored appropriately so that it's successful. So we're looking forward to those two projects being completed. Ooh, okay, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Dawn.
Thank you. It looks like what's going on next year, doesn't it? And this year as well. So the Community Development Block Grant, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is run by, or is rather administered by, Housing Urban Development, federal government program. Our program coordinator is Joanne Stewart. Joanne's been working this now going on probably 15 years. You will also find in your packet a very thorough memo that Joanne put together in regards to some of the projects, and so I'm just going to highlight a few of them. So the city receives approximately $105,000 per year, keeping in mind that while that doesn't seem like a lot, we've been able to do a lot with that over the past 20 years. So 15% goes to public services, and typically the City Council allocates that to the Anacortes Family Center. 2018-2021, public services, shelter programs, homelessness, supportive services assisted approximately 726 individuals. We know these numbers from the reporting that we get from the various agencies, for instance, Anacortes Family Center, Housing Authority, Community Action, so forth. 2018, preservation of rental housing, 2 households and helping 7 individuals at $65,000. 2019, preservation of rental housing, essential appliances for a 20-unit low-income apartment complex. That was a Anacortes Family Center projects, and they didn't have adequate funding to get all the appliances, and so the CBDG grant helped on that. 2019, the Salvation Army's refrigeration units went out, and then we were able to use HUD money to provide them with $59,000 to get some new refrigeration units that they calculated was helping 1,988 individuals. 2019-2020, that was during COVID. We were able to use the COVID relief funds for small business grants, rental relief, and that was approximately $178,000. 20 local businesses retaining 100 employees, and they were all able to remain in business. 2020, additional rental relief, approximately $57,000 was applied to help 26 families. And then in 2020, CDBG, CV, the city allocated $25,000 for a cold weather shelter. And the city's done the cold weather shelters for a few years now and been very successful. And so that's just kind of a snapshot. Again, you have a memo in your packet that describes pretty much every one of them that we did. So we're coming to a little bit of a close, and this year we have a few people who are retiring. Joanne Stewart, our program coordinator, is retiring, and we've interviewed someone who we think might be a good fit. Dave Eichels, our permit coordinator, will be leaving the city this year. and I'll be retiring this year as well. And it's been my pleasure to serve the community for 30 years. Thank you.
And I just want to say that it's been our pleasure to work with you, Dawn, over these last many years. And you, Dave, and Joanne will all be missed. You've all had a big impact on the city and on all of us. So thank you. And that's all we've got tonight.
And a special thank you from the commission to Mr. Meismer, who's been an invaluable resource and aid here in our work. Almost all these projects at some point are going to come before the commission, be subject to public hearing, so I don't think we'll get into any gory details at this point. Are there any questions or comments from the commissioners? None being heard. I want to thank the staff who've done an outstanding job over the last years, and in particular in this presentation, preparing us for the future and hopefully not scaring anybody else off of the commission. With that, I will bring the meeting to a close. Thank you all.